I'm making a retro-inspired survival horror game called The Revanchist. And as I'd mentioned previously, I want to get a playtest build up and running sooner rather than later. I'm looking to make it a 10 to 15 minute vertical slice, basically the first section of the game with most of the story omitted. And I'd like to get that demo up to the same quality and level of detail that I'm striving for in the final product, to get a feel for how it's all going to fit together. So I had a couple of blockouts put together for the first handful of levels, but I'm not very experienced putting together actual level geometry. And since I'm going to be heading back to work pretty soon, I won't have as much time to work on the Revanchist, so I've got to find an efficient workflow for doing this. I have no idea what that's going to look like, so what I've decided to do is this. I want to give myself one day to work on bringing a couple of these levels to life. It isn't really going to give me a faster workflow for putting them together, but it will at least give me an idea of how long I can expect this kind of thing to take. So to start, I exported the blockouts from Unreal into 3ds Max. I still haven't learned Blender, and basically just traced over them with super simple geometry, then exported that back into Unreal and replaced the blockouts with them. And for textures, I've actually been using Megascans. Because I'm not going for a high-res, photorealistic PBR look to the game, I had to do a bit of legwork, compositing a few different texture maps and doing some processing to make these retro-style textures look a lot less flat than if I just used the raw diffuse map. The nice part of using pre-made assets for materials is, even though I still have to put in a bit of work to get them looking right, it's still quick and easy, and I could put together a lot of different variants in a short amount of time. And this kind of variation is really important to make levels look rich and visually interesting. You may not notice it, but for example, this level here has over a dozen different concrete materials. Several of them are very similar, but all of them are just different enough to make the world look a lot more dynamic and lived in. One thing I don't want to do is leave any big, empty sections in rooms or on walls. I don't need every square inch to be covered in clutter, but there should be something to break it up a bit. Thankfully, I have a handful of miscellaneous assets already put together that I can scatter around here for now. I did also make a new spline mesh to add these small pipes, which I think adds a lot to the overall look, as well as a few new decals. Things are starting to take shape, but the level still felt like it was missing something. Movement. A little bit of movement goes a long way towards making a level feel alive. I'm planning to make a couple more particle systems in the future, but just don't have the time for it right now. What I did have time for, though, is making the lights flicker. This is a simple but flexible system that gives me a decent level of control over the timing, distribution, and strength of the flickering. Once again, a simple effect that adds a lot to the feel of the environment. Also worth mentioning that I've been playing around with dithering effects on the screen. I always liked the dithered look of the first Silent Hill and think it would be a good fit here. So I played around with it a little bit and ended up finding a good balance where it's noticeable but not overpowering. So after spending a day grinding away at this is where I was at. I'd say this is a decent start, but I'd love to hear what people think about it. And if you like what you're seeing, go wishlist The Revanchist on Steam. So something else worth mentioning is I really don't want this game to be another bland, horror-themed walking simulator. I think everyone's starting to get pretty tired of those. As such, I've got to add some way to track large-scale progression as the game goes on. The way I'm going to do this is with flags. It's a simple system where I can set named variables that can be accessed globally. It was easy enough to program and lets me store and access information like whether this fuse is replaced. And on that note, how are we going to replace the fuse? I could always do it the simple way, similar to how the doors work with keys. When you interact with it, it'll check if you have an item in your inventory. If you do, it'll activate. If you don't, it won't. I'm not going to do it that way though. I'm not going to be doing anything too elaborate as far as puzzles, but sort of like old Resident Evil, a lot of the puzzles are going to be as simple as having to recognize where and when to use the right item. And so for this, it's important that you have to manually use the item. For now, I just have this really simple one-item puzzle put together, but it's going to be easy enough to expand on moving forward. I also added this system for camera cuts for puzzles and some of the interactions as well. It's something a lot of older horror games do that I'm a big fan of, so I wanted to bring it back. And it kind of ties into my philosophy of intentional jank here, where I go a bit out of my way to make things less seamless. That being said, I definitely have been cautious with this sort of thing. I think it's bad on purpose is a crock of shit, and whether it's in a game, movie, or whatever, it's just not a good excuse. Now before we move on from here, I may as well get the last bit of inventory functionality added in. Combining items. I've definitely been avoiding this because I wasn't sure exactly how it was going to work on the back end, but now feels as good a time as any to knock it out and be done with it. Took a bit of thinking to figure out a good system for this that would work with the rest of the inventory system, and this is another mechanic that I just couldn't think of a good way to test until it was totally programmed, so I just dove in headfirst and hoped for the best. And my hopes were well placed, because aside from a couple of minor bugs from not plugging things in right, it all worked straight away. Riding the high from this success, there's one more feature I wanted to get programmed. I need to add a save feature to the doors in the game, keeping track of whether they're locked or unlocked, open or closed, things like that. Now, if you've seen my previous videos, you should understand why this frightens me. Honestly, it actually wasn't that bad. Only took an hour or so to get working, thank God. Finally, I looked into why the examine text isn't working. Turns out my array of text just keeps getting erased for some reason. I can't figure out why this is happening, but it just gets totally wiped every now and then. I've just realized though that I could just copy and paste the array into a text file, so next time it clears, I just paste it all back in one go, which is nice. So that's pretty much all I want to show off for now. This is a bit of a shorter video, but as I go, there's less and less I want to show off to avoid spoiling too much. So if you like what you're seeing here and you want to support the game, the best way to do so are to wishlist it on Steam, which I'm sure you've already done, and to spread the word. If you know anyone who you think would be interested, send them my way, it really does help. Because a little something about me is my background is in sales and management. People would always tell me things like, oh wow, you really know what you're doing, and my response is usually along the lines of, nope, I'm just good at pretending. And thing is, that's not a lie. And that's definitely the case here in game development. This is my first real game, and as such, it probably sucks as it is. And getting more eyes on this project helps me figure out what I might be doing wrong, what areas I should focus on more or less, things like that. And on that same note, if you have any thoughts on the game, even just little nitpicks, I'd love to hear it so I can keep it in mind as development goes on. As always, thank you very much, and have a fantastic rest of your day.